I'm personally happy that there is at least 39 to 40% who say that it's being managed at product and engineering level. In my opinion, I'm also happy that the second majority said shared responsibility. There's only a very few who said it should be security who should be driving it. I actually don't think it should be security who should drive it. It should still be sitting under product and engineering, but security should be giving feedback or inputs or, help shape the program the way it needs to be shaped. But at the end of the day, your product managers, your engineering leaders should still be the people who should understand how it works, embed it into like the whole product development lifecycle and kind of take it from there. CISA is making a huge effort coming up with principles and asking companies to take a pledge. The idea to ask companies to take a pledge, in my opinion, is to make them think about this and have this as a part of the whole PDLC or SDLC.
Welcome to Season 4 of The Elephant in AppSec, the podcast to explore, challenge, and boldly face the AppSec elephants in the room. I'm Alexandra, your host, AppSec enthusiast, and growth manager at Escape. Today on the show, I'm joined by Abhijeth Dugginapeddi, Director of Offensive Security at Palo Alto Networks. Before this, he built and led product and cloud security at BigCommerce and worked on AppSec at Commonwealth Bank and Adobe. Abhijeth is deeply passionate about giving back to the community. He's taught advanced web app security at UNSW, mentored for multiple outreach programs, and recently launched his first LinkedIn learning course, Practical Secure by Design. He's also been recognized in the Hall of Fame at companies like Google, Yahoo, and others for uncovering serious vulnerabilities across their platforms. In this episode, we get into the idea and the principles of Secure by Design, who should own it, and why security culture matters so much. We also talk about IPO readiness from a product security perspective and the real-world challenges startups face when trying to build security in. If you enjoy this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and follow it on your favorite podcasting app or YouTube. It's the best way to avoid missing future episodes. And with that, get ready to hear Abhijeth's opinions. Dive right in! Hi, Abhijeth. I'm super excited to have you on Elephant and AppSec podcast as a guest. I think we've already been chatting, about the appearance since October last year. You had some important career changes since then as well, and we met each other, at San Francisco. So it's been great, to stay in touch. And I've been following, your activity on LinkedIn as well. Like you actually recorded quite a lot of podcasts, right?
Yeah, I've been lucky to chat with a few friends about various topics. And because you do cybersecurity for a significant period of time, like you start forming opinions or you start forming specializations in some areas because it's actually a very vast area, right? Like sometimes new people come and ask us like, oh, I want to start my career in cybersecurity. Where do I start? And that in itself is a big question for a lot of people because of the various specializations that we have in the industry. So yeah, I've been lucky to like play around with a few specializations. So when you meet people in different areas, you get to explore and share opinions. So yeah, that's why I've been lucky to like do a few podcasts already.
Yeah, I think in cybersecurity, people love to share their opinions, which is great. I mean, I think that's the way also for the industry to kind of go forward and to exchange the knowledge and maybe sometimes to challenge the status quo, because that was initially, the goal of the podcast as well. And I saw recently that you asked people their opinions on Secure by Design principles, which is been for the past couple of years, I would say, a big conversation whether or not companies should integrate it, whether it should be secure by design, who should lead it. And I think I saw the results. It was maybe 40 or 39%, the product and engineering teams that it sits within them. I didn't look on the size of the companies, of course, because maybe that's what makes it different. And then only 26 people responded that it should be sitting, within security. Why did you decide to run it actually? And were surprised by those results?
I was also curious about this question, right? Because I was secure by design. Turns out there's actually a slight difference between security by design and secure by design. I was talking with a few friends and I was just asking around. I was talking to friends in cybersecurity and non-cybersecurity and asked them if they understood the concept of secure by design, and I asked them, who manages it in your company? In some companies, some of my friends were like, oh, like we don't really have that concept. Like we build products and we do pen testing and then we push it to production. Whereas some of the other mature companies were like, oh yeah, like our product managers and engineering leaders are aware of this process. Like it's very much embedded into our SDLC. So this got me a question like, who owns it in large companies? So that's why I put the post. I'm personally happy that there is like at least 39 to 40% who say that it's being managed at product and engineering level. In my opinion, I'm also happy that the second majority said shared responsibility. There's only a very few who said it should be security who should be driving it. I actually don't think it should be security who should drive it. It should still be sitting under product and engineering, but security should be giving feedback or inputs or, help shape the program the way it needs to be shaped. But at the end of the day, your product managers, your engineering leaders should still be the people who should understand how it works, embed it into like the whole product development lifecycle and kind of take it from there. I know in America, like CISA is making a huge effort coming up with some principles and asking companies to take a pledge. If you just go on the internet and search for companies that have taken Secure by Design pledge, the idea to ask companies to take a pledge, in my opinion, is to make them think about this and have this as a part of their, the whole PDLC or SDLC. It's not a checkbox. It's not simply like, oh, I've done my pen test. Here's your attestation letter. It's not simply like, okay, I have a SaaS scanner, that's enough. It's more the mindset. It's more when you're sitting and deciding how your product should work. Are you thinking about security? Are you enabling some of the fundamental security features or security principles? Are you embedding them into what you're building? And often, as we all know, because security is a human problem, changing the mindset is harder than you think it is. I actually think it's maybe slightly easier to get rid of a class of vulnerabilities in the entire company than change the mindset. And that's why in the last 2 to 3 years, you see a lot of people talking about secure by design. Everyone has different opinions, which is okay because at the end of the day, you have to apply it to a company's context. But changing the mindset is still one of the hardest problems. And that's why it's not an easy problem to embed security at a design level.
Do you think the company should achieve certain, level of maturity to start thinking about secure by design? Because sometimes, let's say, in startups, you're not going to think directly, about the secure by design or security culture. It's just, yeah, almost, impossible because you have so many other things to deal with at the same time. So what level of maturity, for example, for someone who wants to take a pledge by CISA, do they already have to have a certain size, maybe a security team, or when should they go and do that?
I think the short answer is yes, because you need to have some security processes in place. But I've also seen startup founders or companies of a smaller size think in the right direction or head in the right direction from the get-go. That's because they have the knowledge and they are aware of some of these problems. So I think the question is, do you need to be a mature company or do you need some level of security maturity to take the Secure by Design pledge or to even implement some of these principles? Although it might sound like it, I think the answer is no. I don't think you need to be a mature company, or I don't think you need to have all the processes enabled to even take the pledge. Because I almost feel like that's the whole point. Because if you're a startup founder and if you're thinking about building a product, from the time you're thinking about building a product, if you are able to embed some of these principles, I think that has a bigger impact than you building a product 5 years later, getting to a mature state, and then coming to the drawing board and saying, we need to implement secure by design. Let's start looking at some of the principles that we agreed upon many, many years ago. And then suddenly realize, no, half of them don't make any sense, or wow, okay, cool. We never even thought about principle of least privilege. We just kept giving access to everyone. Let's start going to the customers and removing access cause, and then one, customers are not happy because they had access and now you're telling you're going to go remove the access. You're not happy because you're going back to the drawing board, changing the way your architecture works, changing your code, refactoring your code. So there's a lot of unknown security debt that you're building. And then you're also wasting money and resources in the process of building a company. So the whole thing could have been avoided if you thought about some of these principles from get-go. It also comes down to awareness. I did notice some founders having this awareness from the time they start building a company. Although I do have to say it's not easy, and it's very, very few founders who have that awareness and try to think about it from get-go. Hopefully one day, like we'll get to a point where there'll be more. I also feel like it's a change in awareness, right? Like 20 years ago, if I went and told my mother, I remember I went and told my mother I want to become a cybersecurity engineer. She was like, what is it?
Yeah.
There was not even a designation called cybersecurity. Whereas today, the other day, I was talking to my mother and she was like, I got a scam message and I didn't click on it. You'll be proud of me.
Mm.
And the reason I'm sharing this is if someone like my mother, who has never used a computer, today understands what a scam message is, if you want to build a tech company, especially a tech company, I actually don't think you have an excuse to not know about security. Sure, you may not be an expert. I'm not expecting anyone to be an expert, but you should have some basic awareness. And as security industry, our goal is to provide that level of base level awareness. And if we are able to provide that base level awareness, that's when they can go ahead and talk to a security expert and do the right thing.
Yeah, I think sometimes when you didn't have it depends on the age of the founders. When you had, for example, previous experience in the companies where security was not, an afterthought, you have a bit of reflection on it as well. But if you, for example, started from scratch when you were, 19, 20, it's not always the case. So it's very hard to find that balance. And sometimes it's the realities of the businesses that you want to work with that push you actually to consider security, like get SOC 2 certification as a starting point as well. So that helps at least a little bit to create this awareness, even if it's just Vanta videos or something like that. But you mentioned before, the security culture, the fact that it's almost it's very hard to change, it's very hard to create, and it's very hard to build. Overall, sometimes a security professional can be lucky to enter the companies that empower security practitioners, but sometimes that's not the case. And it's like a constant battle. And I know some people who left, their companies because that was not the case. And especially, like you mentioned, for like product now, security kind of beyond by product managers in a sense. Like I had a lot of discussions, over the season about it. How would you, for example, educate like those product managers or product and engineering teams to actually also help you maybe building the security culture? Do you think it's realistic?
I think it's realistic. I'm very optimistic in that perspective because at the end of the day, if the product managers or engineering leaders understand what security risks mean, understand what it can do to the company, and understand where we come from, nobody wants to build an insecure product. Not even the product managers, not even the engineering leaders, like not even the engineers. They don't want to write insecure code. They don't want to come up with, product features that are not secure. I think the gap is obviously the awareness and the way the security leaders collaborate with product and engineering leaders. I think it's the collaboration. You may have heard this saying for a really long time, saying security should be an enabler, there shouldn't be enforcers. I think there needs to be a fine balance. Most of the time, we should be enablers, but sometimes, like if I had to pick a percentage, maybe I would say 10 to 15% of times, we need to know how to enforce it, because you just can't be enablers all the time. At the same time, you can't be enforcers all the time too. So the reason I'm talking about why enabling and collaboration is important is if security leaders are able to achieve that with product and engineering, then it's easier to make those arguments. Because when they're thinking about designing a new feature, if they already know that, hey, if I don't include MFA, someone can steal credentials on the internet and easily log into my customer accounts. If they already understand why it is important to implement MFA, it's almost a no-brainer. Like they would just simply be like, oh yeah, I've included MFA, by the way. I've even heard product managers come to me and say stuff like, hey, Abhijeth, you'll be proud of me. Look at the document. I already included security requirements. Or they would come to me and they have this like cheeky smile on their face. And I know like some product managers who took security seriously and they asked me questions and they used to actually give me a lot of trouble if I did not give them a good answer or if they did not give them like something concrete. And those are the kind of people I absolutely enjoy working with, which also gave me a lot of optimism towards the whole idea of secure by design and gave me a lot of optimism towards, yes, it is actually possible for them to think about it as long as they have the right tools, right mindset,
Mm-hmm.
and right culture. Now, the biggest question, I guess, is how do we build that culture?
Yeah, I think
And how do we,
that's probably the most difficult part of it.
it's, it's easier said than done. I think I have three different takes on it. Three different takes, three different ways we can achieve it. One, by security being a little bit more transparent. Like I know there are still a lot of companies where security is sitting in its own ivory tower and product engineering has no clue what security is doing. We don't share information. We don't do any presentations. We don't do any brown bags. How are they supposed to know? How are they supposed to collaborate when you don't go and talk to them or when you don't go and make that effort? Like, if you want to shake hands, like you need two people to put their hand forward to shake hands. So I think that's the number one thing I want to recommend, or I keep suggesting my friends is like, don't sit in your own ivory tower. Go have conversations. Not all conversations need to have an outcome. It's not all about risk acceptance. It's not always about vulnerabilities. Just try to understand what they're trying to build and how you can be embedded or how you can be a part of it. Two, coming from pen testing, offensive, AppSec background, I think there is a lot of merit to doing hackathons and CTFs together, not just security doing their own thing, not doing it just for product and engineering teams, but doing them together. Because then you're able to share that knowledge at a ground level, at an intern or a graduate engineer level. And then at the same time, because of my point number one, you have leaders talking to each other, sitting together and sharing opinions. So with the first point you're tackling at a leadership level, with the second point you're tackling it at an individual contributor level, then you're kind of giving a good coverage to the entire, you can say, maybe that's the method to the madness. And the third thing that I think most people should do is make them a part of security decision making. If you want to introduce a new security policy, don't just have your security people write the policy. Include someone from product engineering or IT or various stakeholders, whoever your stakeholders is. Include them as a part of your decision making. That way, they understand how we think. We are trying to understand, we are already trying to understand how they think. And when you implement a policy, whatever policy it is, and then go and talk to the engineering leaders, because they were a part of the decision making, you're ensuring the policy is more understandable to product engineering. You're making sure that it's easily digestible for them. And you're also making sure, like if they say, hey, how did you come up with this policy? Then you can always be like, hey, we told you, you were a part of the decision making. So
If they remember. Do you have an example of a policy that you've co-written like this with the engineering teams?
quite a few actually. In the AppSec world, I think it is very, very relevant. coming up with these policies because most of AppSec kind of revolves around working with product and engineering, getting them on board and having this mutual understanding, like be it SaaS stuff or be it like software dependencies or in AppSec world, those are the kind of policies where you get a common understanding. In the design world, this is where it gets a little bit tricky because one policy doesn't apply to all. In my experience, some of the things that we have mutually agreed to is like MFA is an example that I gave where we decided that every app needed to have MFA, but the policy was not written by security, but it was written by IT with support of security. So although the policy was implemented by IT, security gave all the requirements, all the feedback, and it was an IT-driven initiative. But security still got what we got out of it because all the apps had MFA enabled. And that's just like a very simple example. There's quite a few. The other one at a product level, in my previous company, I used to work with an e-commerce SaaS platform. So we had like more than 70,000 e-commerce websites were being designed. You drag and drop a bunch of buttons and your website would be ready. And it was all hosted on this SaaS platform. So it was a shared environment. We needed to be aware of GDPR, CCPA, PCI was a huge thing. When PCI 4 was first introduced, I think about 18 months ago, nobody really knew what the changes were. So as much as few product teams used to come to us and then they used to be like, hey, by the way, what does this new changes mean? I remember in one of the meetings I said, I am as confused as you. And the reality is, at the end of the day, I am also a human being. So I was trying to giving them a perspective of, oh, by the way, PCI 4
Point of
11.6.1, for example, is something along the lines of, hey, you need to make sure that nobody has access to your credit cards. It's in an iframe, but it doesn't necessarily talk anything about a CSP policy. It says it needs to be an iframe, doesn't talk about where it needs to be hosted, something along those lines. I mean, I need to fact check myself, but so I told the product manager, like, I'm also equally confused, but let's figure this out together. I'll go, from my point of view, I'll go out, I'll talk to an auditor, I'll get some clarification from an external auditor. Meanwhile, you come up with some approaches on how we can implement this, and let's sit together and come up with a solution and come up with what features we need to build. And then we eventually came to a mutual agreement. We implemented a policy and we decided because it was going to impact more than 70,000 checkout pages, 70,000 e-commerce websites. So we had to be very mindful. So we came up with something. We decided we implemented a new change, alpha, beta, GA, and everything was okay. So I think at the end of the day, we as security people, it's okay to say, I'm also figuring out or give me some time. Like it's that way you humanize it a bit more.
Mm.
And when you humanize it a bit more, I think it's easy to implement such policies and, they get it. And like I said earlier, in my opinion, I think product managers or engineering leaders or even designers, they all want to do the right thing. They do want to build things securely. They just sometimes don't know how to and where to start. And that's where security team comes in, give that knowledge, give that expertise.
I think sometimes it's just very hard to know, especially when you're just come out, out of school and where you were not taught what is like secure coding and the practices of secure coding and the practice of secure design. So let's say as a PM, to realize, okay, what is secure and how to implement it. And I think like with policies, it's interesting that you mentioned actually that you went to auditor to ask for their feedback, because quite often it's very hard to interpret indeed all those changes, because I have to read, those PCIDs at 4.0 and to write how, at least for me on the vendor side, it was at that point of time like API security, why it would be important and whether it kind of represent any significant market shift. And there are just so many resources online. If you don't have access to the auditor, which sometimes you can see clearly it's entirely written by ChatGPT, just a bit hard to dissect if you don't know, what is good and what is.
Exactly. Because there's so many resources, even ChatGPT can give you different answers depending on one word that is different in your question. So just Just by asking a slightly different question, suddenly ChatGPT is suggesting a different thing. And you can't go to an external auditor and say, I implemented this because ChatGPT told me.
Yeah.
I'm good. I'm good. The auditor is going to be like, obviously, no. Whereas if I go and actually talk to an external auditing company and get their expertise, when I am sitting in my audit, I can always tell the auditor, we took a suggestion from this brand, this person who recommended this as a best practice. That's why we went ahead and implemented it. Show them the feature, show them what you did. And then if it matches against it, it's at the end of the day, it should still match against the requirement. I'm not saying that shouldn't. Then there's more genuinity to it. And from an auditor's perspective, they also know we made an effort rather than just searching something on ChatGPT or making stuff up or coming up with things that we don't understand. So yeah.
Why do you need to show to the auditor the fact that you made an effort? Why is it an important part?
I think in my opinion, it's just sometimes when you're having these conversations, some auditors are very tech savvy. They understand the inside and out. And some auditors only know auditing. And that's the nature of any role, right? Like some of us know things beyond our job description. Some of us only know our job. That's the nature of it. I think when you're having those conversations during an external audit, or if there's room for that conversations, auditors are always curious. Who told you to do this? Or why did you do what you did? I've actually, I remember saying this to one of my external auditors saying, hey, by the way, we consulted with an external party to get an opinion, and we got an opinion, and then we implemented this best practice. Here is how it works. And then, yeah, no, they were cool. Now, is it important? I don't think so. I don't think everyone who's sitting in an audit should go and mention this to an auditor. I actually think it's not very relevant. But it just, for me, as a person who is being audited, I think it shows a little bit of genuinity because I'm actually caring about this and I'm trying to do my job right. And rather than just calling myself an expert, if I don't know something, I'm also willing to go and learn from another expert. Because at the end of the day, I only know things that I know, and I should also be learning. Think about it this way, right? As security people, we always keep telling engineers, oh, you need to learn how to write secure code. We always tell product managers, oh, you need to know how to design secure products. But as a security person, are you learning anything about coding? Are you learning anything about building and designing products? Are you learning anything about what scalability means, what resilience means, what does quality mean? Because if you're not doing all those things and you're just going there and asking them to learn, then it's not fair, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's my culture of, being an employee or working in companies. I try to learn a little bit about the other person's job. That way they will also be curious about my job. And when I try to tell them security, it's also easier for me to understand. Without understanding how a designer sits there and comes up with a feature, how can I go and tell them security principles? It doesn't make in my opinion, it doesn't make any sense.
I think it's very hard sometimes when you're especially like, the more senior you get, in a sense, the more to motivate yourself sometimes to learn about different aspects of it, depending on your background, because quite often you tend to default to your strengths or your previous experience. I mean, in AppSec and ProdSec, quite a lot of people come from software development backgrounds, so they don't think that they need to learn, like not everyone, but yeah, they don't need to learn anymore. But I think sometimes the luxury of security job is that you kind of have to also learn a lot about everything, because otherwise you just can't be successful, because in terms of technologies, there are just so many different technologies that come out every day. And for you, for example, you have very interesting experience. You went through an IPO with the company, and sometimes IPO, I also my previous company went for an IPO, so at least I've seen how much security things we've implemented suddenly, which was for example, how did you manage it? How did you manage the auditing for the preparation? How did you manage the culture change that needs to be done? The one that you've just described, which can be very hard to do. If, for example, I was not previously any security culture, and suddenly you have to do all those trainings. as an employee, and then you have to push others to do all those trainings and do all those checklists. So what was your experience there?
I think most people who worked in security who went through an IPO will agree to what I say. I think pre-IPO, your security processes maybe because there's not everyone, a little bit scrappy, or they're not as polished, or documentation is one of those things I don't think security people or any engineers like to do. I am a part of the problem there. I'm not a huge fan of documentation too. I've only been getting better in the last few years. I think that's many people. So before an IPO, like, you're just implementing process. It works, so it's fine. You have a SaaS scanner. It works. It's fine. Yes, you don't have, let's say, any vulnerabilities coming out of your bug bounty program. That's good. There's not a lot of vulnerabilities that are being found on the internet or by your customers or towards the end of your pipeline. So it works. It's fine. The moment you become IPO'd, suddenly you need to prove all of these things. There's a lot of external scrutiny. There's a lot of third-party risk reviews. And even the board level discussions changes after you go IPO because suddenly they're talking about security. It could be as simple as pre-IPO. If you have an incident, you resolve your incident, wash your hands, and move on with your life. Post-IPO, if you have an incident, right now, especially in the US, you have to declare it to the SEC, depending on the severity. So there's a lot of interactions with lawyers. There's a lot of interaction with external parties in scenarios like that. And as a security person, I actually find that very exciting because I get to explore a new world or have partnership with, let's say, law firms and lawyers, which I know many people may not enjoy those conversations but for me, that's a whole new area that I can learn about. So I think, in short, that's the biggest difference. There is more eyes looking at you, and there are more people asking you questions post IPO. And that's why there's what we used to call it was like road to IPO, and security was one of the requirements as a part of the road to IPO. So we came up with a maturity model. We kept it very simple. We use CIS benchmarking, and we use CIS benchmarking as a maturity model. We had some goals in some areas saying these are the areas. For a bit of transparency, incident response was one of the areas that we wanted to improve. SIM and SOC was another area that we wanted to improve because what I think there's a saying, what can't be measured can't be, I don't know, like I think the saying is what can't be measured can't be matured, something along those lines.
Okay.
So yeah, that was one of the things. Like we didn't have enough insights as a security team, so that is immediately something that we built. From an AppSec point of view, uh, we had some automation, we had stuff working, but we made sure 3 months before IPO, for example, we decided any critical or high risk vulnerability, we're going to break a build. Whereas until that point, we were not breaking a build, it was only in an alert mode, but we were ready to take that risk and be like, hey, now is there time for us to be more mature. By that point, we also reached a level of confidence with the entire processes that we had established. So things like that. We had a private bug bounty program. We increased our researchers to X from what we had because we wanted to, find as many things as we can. And so it's small changes like that. But the whole thing that I appreciate, one thing that my CEO, CTO at that time did was they made a security a requirement as a part of your IPO readiness. Because right now, if you go on the internet, at least maybe as of 1 or 2 years ago, when I searched on the internet about what security teams need to do before going IPO, there isn't a lot of material. There isn't like a playbook. There isn't like a lot of step-by-step guide or anything like that. I don't think there is a fixed playbook, but it'll be nice for someone who is an industry expert to come up with some best practices that they can share, that leaders could use. Maybe we should start. Actually, I just realized that. But I'm sure there's like better people than me who are able to come up with such documentation. There are better experts. But the reason I'm sharing this is like, I think it comes down to maturing some of your process and having answers to how process works. So documentation and um, when you start documenting your processes, sometimes you actually start identifying gaps immediately as you're typing or as you're writing. And I feel like sometimes that's the beauty of documenting your processes. That way you're more ready for any third party audit or any risk assessment. Or even if your customer is coming to you and asking you for some proof, or if they're doing a vendor assessment, then you have your answers ready. So yeah, I think I'll keep it down to only three things.
Interesting. Yeah, because I think I actually not have a person in mind who I could ask for this, like for the playbook that you mentioned, because I was also like thinking about it. It's Mal Reyes. He's done, I think, six. He went for 6 IPOs. So as a security person, so I think it would be great to share the experience. But in your part, have you seen also, because you mentioned like security team, for example, you've changed some frameworks, changed certain ways of doing the processes or like reviewing your vulnerabilities. But have you seen actually the change and the CEO who also told now security is important part? But have you seen maybe not immediately after, but a couple of months after going up a certain change in culture? Or
In the company itself?
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think immediately there was more accountability on every employee. My previous CISO and my previous company, I used to report to the CISO. He coined a very nice term. He said healthy paranoia.
What is
So
that?
not too paranoid about security, but not too careless is either. He coined it healthy paranoia. What it meant was after we became public and we started thinking about, I could see that almost everyone in the company started thinking about security a little bit differently. I almost wished that's the mindset everyone who builds new products and companies have, not just after IPO, but even before IPO or even that's my dream state. I'll give you a few examples, right? Few months after we became IPO, we were doing standard year to year data points and comparing. We received more people reporting phishing than ever before in the history of the company. We saw more product managers creating security tickets for threat modeling than ever before because they wanted to make sure whatever they were building was secure from the time it was get-go. There was a lot of push for our security teams to go and give training on compliance, security, testing, general incident response, etc. The board was more involved in the incident management playbooks. I keep forgetting the term. There's a term for the demo calls that you have that mirror an incident. So we used to have like incident training that we used to do, mock incidents. Yes.
Okay.
The board was more involved in mock incidents after we became an IPO. So if you look at these trends, this is the culture and the mindset that I'm talking about. And this is the healthy paranoia that is hard to measure on a paper. But when you combine all these data points, you start realizing people in the company actually care about security,
Hmm.
actually care about how to do things right. And when you have that, suddenly you're not a 20 to 30 people security team. You're a 2,000 people security team, and you can achieve more things that way than with a 20 to 30 people security team.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. At least hopefully that you can achieve more things that way. Have you seen anyone melt down during mock incident?
Not melt down, but I've seen people stress out, or I've seen people, like, for example, when a question was asked, as engineers, they would immediately realize there's a gap.
Mm.
Like, instantly, they would be like, yeah, we know GCP doesn't do this. I'm going to write up a Jira ticket right now so that we have this action item and we start prioritizing this. Or some other leader would be like, oh, there's already a project, but it was not prioritized. But now I see why it should be prioritized.
Mm.
Let me take this as an action item for me. So I wouldn't necessarily say melt down, or stressed, but more, yeah, now I see it, or be a little bit transparent, or they would send me a Slack message during the mock incident saying, oh, yeah, by the way, there's this ticket. I've been telling my manager, can you also push a little bit? But they see it. I think mock incidents are fantastic. If companies are not spending money on it, they should. I hope most companies do it. But hey, once you become a public company, you need to run mock incident training for all your board and some important leaders in the company. So it's that accountability that changes after you become public. And yeah, that's one thing I'm very happy about. Accountability makes a lot of change in life. So yeah.
Yeah, accountability and the power that you sense. So it's actually a nice spot to be in as a security after you go public. And yeah, so in this season, I always have one question that I ask each guest. What is your least favorite security buzzword and why? Because in security, as you mentioned, we all have opinions. We all know a lot of buzzwords. We started with secure by design. So what is yours?
I think zero trust is right up there just because I think I know my running joke at RSA this year was, wow, everyone's talking about AI security. Nobody's talking about zero trust. Did we all forget? Because I feel like the last 3 to 4 years, everyone talked about zero trust, zero trust, zero trust, and now everyone's talking about AI security or MCP servers. Or the reason I say this is, I think it's still very hard to decouple what zero trust means because it is very contextual. What zero trust means for me might not be the same for you and might not be for another company. But the fundamental concept is very similar. And I hope when we use these security buzzwords, again, this applies to me too. I am also a part of the problem. I'm not necessarily saying, like I'm a guru or whatever. No. I hope when we are using such buzzwords or whatever, we actually make a little bit more effort on how to break it down into simple consumable information. Or sometimes for non-security people, these concepts might be a little bit hard to understand.
Mhm.
So instead of just using buzzwords, can we break it down in a simple way that people could use and understand it? So that's my pet peeve. I'll go with zero trust being my least favorite buzzword right now. You talk to me next year, maybe it'll be AI security. AI security is a close second now, but there's security for AI and there's AI security. So
Mm.
which one is a question? So yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, depending on the definition that it will have in 1 year from now, I guess one of the two. Well, thank you so much for coming on our episode and sharing your experience. It was super insightful, and I hope that it will push maybe one of the listeners to create a guide. I will see in the future, or maybe they will switch the jobs after to go.
I mean, if anyone wants to, you know what? As a part of your podcast, I'm sending out a message. If anyone wants to come up with a guide, I'm happy to provide my 2 cents. Let's sit and work together. Let's collaborate and maybe we can come up with a guide. I think it'll be fun.
Yeah, for sure, and super useful for the community. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Alexandra.